Good afternoon. My essay is called Storm and Anchor, Shame and Hope, sorry. So there are many faces of mental illness, but for me, the first face of mental illness belonged in my family. My name is Margaret Keeler, and I'm a nurse practitioner. I have spent my personal and professional life trying to understand mental illness. You can look through my well-loved books, the degrees on my wall, or even my resume to know that I've been working with mental illness. But for the most important lessons, I experienced those firsthand while growing up in a big Sicilian Irish American family. In many ways, my siblings and I had a wonderful childhood. My mother was loving, loyal, and always present. She was an anchor. Dad was hardworking. He was a World War II vet. He managed to survive the Depression with pure determination and a love of sports and with music. Most of us kids would make it through adolescence dealing with nothing more than teenage angst. But for a few of my family members, and especially my brothers, the onset of the teen years brought a much more complicated picture. As if anger, aggression, delinquency, and a lack of judgment associated with yet undiagnosed mental illness was not enough, remember that it was the late 60s and into the 70s, with a countercultural revolution fueled by unrest and drugs. You can imagine the kind of conflicts that we noted in our family. As you'd expect, there were a lot of fights and futile attempts at changing unacceptable behaviors. Our home quickly turned into organized chaos, our parents grasping at straws, trying to find a solution to some of the issues. My mother stuck with unconditional love as a path to get back to stability. But my father, known for his stormy temper, expressed himself, sometimes in abusive ways, in an attempt to gain control. Soon, an unspoken rule governed our household. We would work through these issues as a family, privately, and behind closed doors. However, sometimes those closed doors ended up opening up and the fights would be on the front lawn. The elements of both overt and covert shame in my family culture impacted me in a profound way. In all the chaos, I felt inadequate, felt that my needs were not worthy of attention, and I felt self-shame. I also somehow felt responsible for standing up to the bullying and at times getting hurt in the process. Thankfully, academic and other outlets helped me to find some balance. But shame, driven by fear and blame, can unravel self-confidence and a sense of connectedness. Shame is what keeps us from telling our own experiences, even in situations where there's profound distress. As I have grown, I've realized that hiding our family problems were a form of defense against this regarding stigma of mental illness that was really portrayed in the news of the time. Often, that term was accompanied by the faces and names of crazy, distant family members who were in Eloise State Hospital, or murderers on TV who were dangerous and unpredictable and violent. That's not necessarily the case of mental illness, as we all know. Eventually, it was clear that my brother, Paul, his behaviors were much more serious, and when I was in junior high school, he experienced his first psychotic break of bipolar with psychotic features. He was very symptomatic. There was never any education and very little support outside of the family to understand how to deal with this illness. Eventually, and after years of turmoil, hospitalizations, homelessness, my brother did get on a life-saving medication called Clozaril. He experienced almost 20 years of stability. We had our brother back. It was really wonderful. Unfortunately, he made a choice not to take his medications any longer, and he lives independently, but he has chosen to be separate from the family. Fast forward a few years, and I find myself in my early 30s with a decade of relative quiet, focused stability, raising my own family, and working in my own profession as a nurse practitioner. My nephew came to live with us in his time of teenage angst and difficult behaviors. In time, it became clear that he inherited the mental illness of my brother. It didn't take long for me to realize the coping mechanisms that I learned when I was growing up were not going to work. I thought to myself, there has to be another way. Shouting, shaming, or belittling would not work. Eventually, my search for knowledge and support led me to NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness. During the meetings, I was encouraged to confront my own shame and stigmatized thoughts about mental illness. I found others who were experiencing the same issues. I learned about medications, empathy, the traumatic impact of mental illness on family and the individual experiencing it. I learned strategies for communication and self-care. And in my research and self-discovery, it came clear to me how damaging shame and stigma are and how it can lead to a lifetime of fear of isolation. But the remedy to shame is empathy, compassion, connection, and courage to share your story. Without shame, people can learn to bring balance into their lives when they're having difficult situations. While I continue to make hiccups and mistakes, the remedies are helping. And so I'd like to end with a challenge. Learn about your own sense of shame and stigma. Be part of the community that offers a balance to those who seek it. And for me, that was NAMI. But you can find it in any place where you might find hope. Thank you.